I stepped onto the white sand and felt 15 years of anticipation dissolve into a single moment of pure joy. The beach stretched before me, untouched and pristine, exactly as I'd imagined it countless times during late nights poring over maps and travel blogs. "You sure about this, Frankie?" Captain Mills called from the boat, his weathered face creased with concern. "Still time to change your mind." I turned back to face him, unable to contain my smile. "I've never been more sure of anything." Jordan Mills shook his head, salt and pepper hair visible beneath his faded captain's hat. 3 weeks is a long time alone. No phone signal. No people. "That's exactly the point," I said, adjusting the straps of my backpack. The weight felt reassuring against my shoulders. 60 pounds of carefully selected supplies that would sustain me during my stay. The captain's eyes scanned the tree line beyond the beach. "People don't come to this island. There's a reason for that." "Because it's remote and hard to reach," I replied confidently, "which makes it perfect." "If you say so." His expression remained troubled. "Remember, I come back on the 18th, 3 weeks exactly. Don't miss the pickup." I nodded, watching as he reluctantly returned to the helm. The boat's engine growled to life, and I stood motionless as it pulled away, creating a widening gap between me and civilization. I kept watching until the boat was just a speck on the horizon, then disappeared completely. Silence descended, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves and distant bird calls. I was alone, completely, wonderfully alone. A mix of emotions washed over me. Triumph at having finally reached this moment, a flutter of anxiety at the reality of my isolation, but mostly an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. 15 years of saving every spare dollar, researching remote locations, and building the skills needed to survive on my own had led to this moment. I turned to face the island that would be my home for the next 3 weeks. The beach gave way to lush vegetation, palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze. According to my research, a freshwater spring lay about half a mile inland, my first priority for setting up camp. With practiced movements, I adjusted my gear and began walking, following the GPS coordinates I'd memorized. The sand gradually gave way to firmer ground as I entered the tree line, the temperature dropping slightly under the canopy of leaves. Birds called overhead, and small creatures rustled in the undergrowth as I passed. After 20 minutes of careful hiking, I heard it, the soft burble of running water. The spring emerged from a small rocky outcropping, creating a clear pool before continuing as a narrow stream toward the ocean. Perfect. I spent the next few hours setting up my base camp with methodical precision. First, I cleared a space for my tent, removing any stones or debris that might make for an uncomfortable night's sleep. Next came the tent itself, a lightweight but durable model I'd tested extensively in various weather conditions back home in Washington. My supplies were unpacked and organized with a system that would have made my accounting colleagues smile. Everything in its place, inventoried and arranged for maximum efficiency. Water purification tablets in the left front pocket of my backpack. First aid kit in the right. Food supplies stacked by expiration date. As I worked, memories of how this obsession began floated through my mind. I could almost smell the musty scent of my father's study, where as a 10-year-old boy, I'd spent hours poring over his collection of National Geographic magazines. One issue in particular had featured an explorer who spent 6 months alone on a remote island. The photographs of empty beaches and star-filled skies had ignited something in me, a yearning for that kind of solitude and connection with nature. My father had found me there, cross-legged on the floor surrounded by open magazines. "What are you looking at, Frankie?" he'd asked. "I'm going to do this someday," I'd told him, pointing to the explorer standing alone on a beach much like the one I just left behind. "I'm going to find my own island." He'd laughed and ruffled my hair. "Well, you better start saving your allowance then." And I had. Every birthday check, every summer job, every bonus from my accounting firm, all carefully deposited into what I'd named my island fund. By late afternoon, my camp was established. I'd hung a tarp for additional shelter, set up a small cooking area, and organized my supplies. Satisfied with my work, I took a moment to simply absorb my surroundings. The island was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Flowering plants I couldn't name added splashes of color to the green canopy. The air was thick with the scent of vegetation and salt spray. In the distance, I could hear the ocean, a constant, soothing presence. As evening approached, I prepared a simple meal on my portable stove, then carried it to the edge of the clearing where I could watch the sunset through a break in the trees. The sky transformed into a canvas of orange, pink, and purple hues that no photograph could ever truly capture. Night fell quickly, as it does in the tropics, and the stars emerged, countless points of light undiminished by city glow. I lay back on my sleeping pad, set up outside the tent to enjoy the full celestial display, and felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was everything I'd hoped for: the perfect solitude, the pristine nature, the complete absence of emails to answer or meetings to attend. No artificial lights, no traffic sounds, no human voices. Just the rhythm of the waves, the chorus of night insects, and the vast canopy of stars above. As I drifted towards sleep, I felt more content than I had in years. My meticulous planning had paid off. I had found my paradise, exactly as I'd dreamed it would be. I closed my eyes, lulled by the gentle sound of waves in the distance, completely unaware that this peaceful paradise contained secrets the locals had intentionally kept from me. 2 weeks flew by faster than I expected. What had started as an uncertain adventure had transformed into a comfortable routine that felt more natural to me than my life back in Seattle. I'd settled into a rhythm on the island that made perfect sense, fishing at first light when the water was still and clear, mapping new sections of the island during the cooler morning hours, and documenting everything I'd seen and learned in my journal each evening by firelight. The fishing part had been rough at first. I'd brought some basic supplies, hooks, line, a collapsible rod, but my early attempts were embarrassing. I spent 3 hours the first day without a single bite. By the end of the first week, though, I'd figured out the best spots along the eastern shore where the reef created a natural feeding ground. This morning, I'd caught 2 decent-sized fish within 20 minutes, cleaned them with the hunting knife I'd once thought was overkill to pack, and had them smoking over a small fire before the sun fully cleared the horizon. Not bad for an accountant, I said to myself, turning the makeshift spit to ensure even cooking. My mapping project had become an unexpected source of pride. I'd divided the island into rough quadrants and explored a new section each day, marking notable features on the waterproof paper I'd brought. The island was larger than I'd initially thought, about 3 miles across at its widest point, with terrain that varied from the white sand beaches to rocky outcroppings on the northern shore and a surprisingly dense forest interior that rose to a modest peak at the center. I finished my breakfast and packed my day bag, water, notebook, compass, snack bars, and first aid supplies. Today's goal was to finish charting the northwestern quadrant, which would complete my basic map of the entire island. I'd saved this section for last because the terrain was more challenging, with thicker vegetation and steeper inclines. As I hiked through the forest, pushing aside branches and navigating around fallen logs, I couldn't help but compare the person I was now to the one who had stepped off Captain Mills's boat 2 weeks ago. My hands, once soft from typing financial reports, were now calloused and strong. My skin had darkened despite the sunscreen I applied religiously. Even my posture felt different, more balanced, more aware. The forest grew denser as I moved inland. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered patches, creating a dappled effect on the ground. I stopped to examine a cluster of mushrooms growing on a fallen tree, carefully sketching them in my notebook and adding notes about their appearance. I wasn't confident enough to eat any wild fungi, but documenting them felt important. A sudden rustling in the underbrush about 20 yards away made me look up sharply. I held perfectly still, watching for movement, but saw nothing. Probably a bird or small mammal, I told myself, though I hadn't encountered many animals larger than lizards during my stay. Just the wind, I muttered, returning to my sketch. But as I continued my hike, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the bird calls less frequent. I'd experienced this sensation a few times before when exploring the interior, a prickly awareness at the back of my neck as if I were being observed. I laughed at myself. 2 weeks alone and you're getting paranoid, Frankie. The human mind was designed for social interaction. It made sense that isolation would play tricks on me. I'd read about this phenomenon during my preparation, how people in solitary situations often developed the sensation of a presence. Some evolutionary psychologists theorized it was a survival mechanism, keeping us alert in unfamiliar environments. I pushed on, reaching a small clearing where sunlight streamed down unobstructed. The warmth felt good after the cool shade of the forest. I sat on a fallen log and pulled out my water bottle and a protein bar, taking a moment to rest and update my map. According to my calculations, I was about half a mile from the northwestern shore. My journal entries had evolved over the past 2 weeks. The early ones were clinical, focused on practical matters, water sources, edible plants, weather patterns. But gradually, they'd become more reflective. Last night, I'd written about how the constraints of my former life, the deadlines, the office politics, the constant digital notifications, seemed increasingly absurd from this distance. Here, success was measured in immediate, tangible outcomes. Did I catch fish? Did I maintain my shelter? Did I find fresh water? The clarity was refreshing after years of chasing abstract financial targets and performance metrics. I finished my snack and continued toward the shore, making notes about the changing vegetation as the forest began to thin. When I finally broke through to the coastline, I was greeted by a dramatic landscape of volcanic rocks jutting from the water, with waves crashing against them in explosive bursts of white spray. I spent an hour documenting this section of coastline, completing my circuit of the island. There was something deeply satisfying about having explored every part of my temporary home. I'd come to know its contours and character in a way that felt intimate, like learning the lines of a lover's face. The sun was high overhead when I began my trek back to camp. I took a different route, wanting to fill in some gaps in my map. This path led me through a particularly dense section of forest where the trees grew so close together that I had to squeeze between their trunks in places. That uneasy feeling returned, stronger this time. I stopped and turned slowly in a complete circle, scanning the surrounding forest. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the sensation of being watched persisted. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. I knew there was no one else on the island. The only response was the rustle of leaves in the light breeze and the distant sound of waves. I shook my head and pressed on, attributing the feeling to the natural human discomfort with being truly alone. Back at camp, I busied myself with improvements to my shelter. What had started as a simple tent setup had evolved into something more elaborate. I'd constructed a raised platform of lashed-together branches to keep my tent off the ground during rain. A series of tarps created an extended living area where I could sit comfortably regardless of weather. I'd even built a small table and bench from driftwood. As the afternoon waned, I decided to mark my 2-week milestone with a celebration. I'd been saving one of my freeze-dried meals, beef stroganoff, my favorite, for a special occasion. I also had a small flask of whiskey tucked away in my supplies, a luxury I'd rationed carefully. I built a larger fire than usual and prepared my feast as the sun began to set. The freeze-dried meal wasn't exactly gourmet, but after 2 weeks of fish and foraged plants, it tasted incredible. I sipped the whiskey slowly, savoring its warmth as it spread through my chest. As darkness fell, I leaned back against my log seat and looked up at the stars emerging in the clear night sky. The Milky Way stretched across the blackness like a river of light, more vivid than I'd ever seen it back home. No light pollution here, no skyscrapers or power lines to obstruct the view. "Thank you," I said aloud, raising my tin cup to the sky. The ritual felt right, acknowledging my gratitude for this place, for the experience, for my own surprising competence. I'd come here seeking something I couldn't quite articulate. A test, perhaps, or an escape. What I'd found was a version of myself I barely recognized, but deeply respected. The Frankie who could build a shelter, catch his own food, and navigate by the stars seemed like a distant relative to the man who'd spent the last decade hunched over spreadsheets. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward. I added another piece of driftwood and watched the flames leap higher. The circle of light extended about 15 feet around me, beyond which the darkness of the island was complete. A rustling sound came from the edge of the forest, about 20 yards from my camp. I turned toward it, expecting to see one of the small nocturnal creatures I'd occasionally glimpsed during my stay. "Come on out," I called softly. "I won't hurt you." The rustling stopped abruptly. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out shapes beyond the firelight. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, at the exact boundary where the light from my fire faded into darkness, I saw them, two glowing red eyes, about 3 feet off the ground, staring directly at me. I froze, my cup halfway to my lips. Those eyes didn't belong to any animal I recognized. They were too bright, too steady, too aware. A cold sensation spread from my chest outward, reaching my fingertips and toes. It wasn't the rational fear of a potential predator. It was something deeper, more primal. The eyes blinked once, slowly, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My vision narrowed, tunneling until all I could see were those glowing red points in the darkness. Something in my brain screamed danger in a way I'd never experienced before. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the eyes vanished. The rustling resumed, moving away from my camp and deeper into the forest. I sat motionless, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The peaceful satisfaction I'd felt moments ago had evaporated completely, replaced by a certainty that I was not, as I had believed, alone on this island. I grabbed a flashlight from my tent and pointed it toward the glowing red eyes at the edge of the forest. My hand shook as I tried to steady the beam. "Hey, get out of here!" I yelled, trying to sound bigger and more threatening than I felt. The eyes blinked slowly, unimpressed by my display. I picked up a stick and banged it against a nearby rock, making as much noise as possible. The red orbs finally disappeared, but I didn't feel relieved. Something about those eyes seemed wrong, not animal, not natural. I built up my fire higher, feeding it with the driest wood I could find. The flames cast long shadows across my camp, but I preferred that to the alternative, darkness where those eyes could hide. I sat with my back against a tree, facing the spot where I'd seen them. Just a wild animal, I told myself. Probably a wild cat or something. But I didn't believe it. No animal I knew had eyes that glowed like that or made me feel so disconnected when I looked at them, like I was being pulled out of myself. A rustling sound came from my left, about 20 yards from where I'd first seen the eyes. I swung my flashlight toward it, catching a glimpse of movement, something low to the ground, moving with purpose between the trees. "Hey!" I shouted again. The rustling stopped. Then, impossibly, it started again, this time from behind me. I spun around, heart racing. Whatever it was, it had circled my camp in seconds. That wasn't normal. That wasn't possible. I grabbed my hunting knife and held it tight. The metal felt reassuring in my palm, though I questioned what good it would do against something that moved so fast. A new sound started then, a low, rhythmic clicking that reminded me of cicadas, but wrong somehow, distorted. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I'd spent 2 weeks on this island and never heard anything like it. "Who's there?" I called out, feeling stupid even as I said it. There was no one else on the island. Captain Mills had confirmed that before dropping me off. The clicking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I decided to retreat to my tent. It wasn't much protection, but it was better than sitting exposed. I grabbed my water bottle, knife, and flashlight, then crawled inside, zipping the entrance closed behind me. I positioned myself so I could see out the mesh window, flashlight ready. The eyes appeared again, closer this time, about 15 feet from my tent. They hovered about 3 feet off the ground. I could make out a vague shape now, something with a long, low body. Not a cat, not anything I recognized. I stared at the eyes, and they stared back. A wave of dizziness hit me suddenly. My vision tunneled, darkening around the edges. I felt a pulling sensation, as if my consciousness was being drawn toward those eyes, away from my body. With tremendous effort, I tore my gaze away, and the sensation stopped. My heart hammered in my chest. "What the hell?" I gasped. A scratching sound came from the side of my tent. Something was trying to get in. I scrambled to the opposite side, knife raised. The fabric bulged inward as something pressed against it. I needed a better weapon. My eyes landed on my camp stove. I had an idea. I filled my pot with water and lit the stove, setting the water to boil. While I waited, the scratching continued, moving methodically around my tent, testing for weakness. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was deliberate. When the water began to bubble, I grabbed the pot with my t-shirt to protect my hand from the heat. I moved to where the scratching was most intense and prepared myself. "Come on," I whispered. The fabric tore. I caught a glimpse of a clawed limb and those red eyes, and I threw the boiling water directly at them. A shrill, inhuman shriek pierced the night. The creature retreated, and I heard it thrashing in the underbrush. The sound faded as it moved away from camp. I was shaking all over, but I had learned something valuable. It feared heat. The fire, the boiling water. These were my weapons now. I spent the next hour reinforcing my position. I gathered more firewood and built 3 smaller fires in a triangle around my tent. I boiled more water and filled every container I had. I found a sturdy branch that I could use as a club if needed. My mind, the accountant's mind that had served me well in my professional life, began cataloging what I knew about the creature. It had red eyes that seemed to have some hypnotic effect. It was intelligent, testing my defenses systematically. It was vulnerable to heat and possibly light. It made unnatural clicking sounds. It could move quickly and silently when it wanted to. I checked my watch. 11:23 p.m., hours until dawn. I had to stay awake. The attacks came in waves after that. Every 30 to 45 minutes, the creature would return, testing a different approach each time. Sometimes it tried to lure me out with strange sounds. Once, disturbingly, with what sounded like a human voice calling for help. Other times, it would rush the perimeter of my fires, looking for gaps. Each time, I drove it back with boiling water or by throwing burning branches. Each time, it retreated only to return with a new strategy. By 2 a.m., exhaustion was setting in. My eyes burned and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. But I couldn't sleep. I knew with absolute certainty that if I did, I wouldn't wake up. The most terrifying moment came around 3 a.m. The creature had been quiet for almost an hour. I was struggling to stay alert when I noticed something strange. A thin, whip-like appendage snaking its way under my tent from behind. I hadn't heard any approach. I stomped on it hard. It withdrew instantly, and I heard that same shriek from earlier. But this time the shriek was answered by another, similar cry from farther away in the forest. There were 2 of them. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I reinforced my fires frantically, adding more wood until they blazed high. I positioned myself in the center of my triangle of fire, a pot of boiling water in one hand, my knife in the other. They came from opposite directions, working in tandem. I caught glimpses of them as they darted between trees, low-slung bodies, longer than they were tall, with limbs that bent at odd angles. But it was the eyes I couldn't forget, red, intelligent, and hungry. I spun between them, trying to keep both in sight. When one rushed forward, I flung hot water toward it. It retreated, but the action left me vulnerable to the second creature, which darted forward and swiped at my leg before I could turn. Pain flared as claws tore through my pants and into my calf. I cried out and swung my knife wildly. The blade connected with something solid, and a dark liquid splattered across the ground. The creature pulled back, making that terrible clicking sound again. I pressed a cloth against my leg to stop the bleeding. The cut wasn't deep, but it burned like fire. I poured some of my drinking water over it to clean it as best I could. For the next hour, the creatures kept their distance but didn't leave. They paced the perimeter of my firelight, watching me, studying me. I got the distinct impression they were learning, adapting to my defenses. My water supply was running low. I had maybe 2 more pots I could boil before I'd have to venture to the spring, which was absolutely out of the question until daylight. Around 4:30 a.m., they changed tactics again. Instead of trying to breach my defenses, they began systematically destroying my camp. One would dart in, grab something, a bag of food, my spare clothes, my journal, and drag it into the darkness. I couldn't chase after them without leaving my fire circle. I watched helplessly as they scattered my supplies into the forest. It was another kind of attack, one that would force me to leave my safe zone eventually. Just hold on, I told myself. Dawn can't be far off. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly. The creatures seemed to sense it too. Their attacks grew more frenzied, more desperate. They rushed my perimeter with increasing boldness. During one charge, I got my clearest look yet at what I was facing. It had a body like a goat, but twisted somehow, with oversized hind legs and a face that was neither fully animal nor anything else I could name. Its eyes locked with mine for a split second, and that pulling sensation returned. Stronger this time, like hooks in my mind trying to drag me out of myself. I fell to my knees, fighting to stay conscious. My vision swam, and for a terrifying moment, I saw my own body from outside, as if I were floating above it. With every ounce of willpower, I forced my eyes shut and broke the connection. When I opened them again, I was back in my body, gasping for air. The sky was definitely lighter now. The creature's movements became more erratic, less coordinated. They made one final, desperate rush at my camp from opposite sides. I flung my last pot of boiling water at one while swinging my makeshift club at the other. They retreated into the forest, their clicking calls fading. The sky continued to brighten. Birds, which had been eerily silent all night, began to sing again. I stayed in my position, knife ready, until the sun broke over the horizon. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto the ground, physically and mentally drained. My paradise had become a nightmare, and I had no idea what I had just survived, only that it would come back when darkness fell again. The first rays of sunlight hit my face, and I nearly cried with relief. The attacks had stopped. I sat motionless for several minutes, my back against a tree trunk, knife still clutched in my white-knuckled grip. My leg throbbed where the creature had clawed me, the makeshift bandage now stiff with dried blood. I forced myself to stand on shaky legs. My once pristine campsite looked like a war zone. The tent hung in tatters, my carefully organized supplies scattered in every direction. Some items had been dragged into the underbrush completely. The 3 small fires I'd built had burned down to embers, and my water containers lay empty. It was real, I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse from shouting through the night. All of it was real. I limped around the perimeter of my camp, searching for evidence beyond my own traumatized memory. Near where I'd first seen the red eyes, I found tracks pressed into the soft earth. They weren't like anything I recognized, not quite animal, with an uneven gait and what looked like elongated back legs. I crouched down, tracing the outline with my finger. The tracks led toward a large tree at the edge of the clearing, where deep gouges marked the bark about 4 feet off the ground. 5 parallel lines, clearly made by claws. My stomach lurched. I'd spent 15 years dreaming of this island, saved every penny, planned for every contingency. Now my paradise was ruined, tainted by terror I couldn't have imagined. I stumbled back to what remained of my camp and dug through the scattered supplies until I found the emergency radio. I'd packed it as a last resort, never truly believing I'd need it. My hands trembled so badly I dropped it twice before managing to turn it on. "Mayday, Mayday," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is Frankie Rush on the North Island. Captain Santos, do you copy? I need immediate evacuation. Emergency situation. Static crackled back at me. I adjusted the frequency and tried again. Captain Santos, this is Frankie Rush. Emergency situation. I need immediate pickup. Please respond. More static, then a broken voice came through. Ush, this is Santos. What's problem? Relief flooded through me. Captain, I need to get off this island, now. There's something. I paused, suddenly aware of how crazy I would sound. There's something dangerous here. I was attacked last night. Animal? Are you hurt? Yes, I'm hurt, but it's not serious. It wasn't a normal animal. Please, I need extraction as soon as possible. The radio crackled. 6 hours. Earliest I can. There. 6 hours. 6 more hours on this island. Understood. I'll be at the beach on the east side. The same. Understood. I'll be at the beach on the east side. The same spot where you dropped me off. Please hurry. Copy that. 6 hours. Hang tight. The radio went silent. I clipped it to my belt and turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except branches swaying in the morning breeze, but that meant nothing. Those things had been perfectly still when they wanted to be. 6 hours. I checked my watch, just past 7 in the morning. Santos wouldn't arrive until early afternoon. I had to stay alert until then. I gathered what remained of my supplies, constantly glancing over my shoulder. My backpack had claw marks across one side, but was still functional. I stuffed it with essentials. My first aid kit, remaining water purification tablets, the hunting knife, what little food hadn't been dragged away, and my journal. Everything else would have to be abandoned. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every rustle in the underbrush made me flinch and spin around. A bird called from somewhere in the canopy, and I nearly dropped my pack. This wasn't normal vigilance. My body was locked in fight-or-flight mode, pumping adrenaline through my system until I felt sick with it. Get it together, I muttered to myself. They don't come out during the day. You saw that. You're safe until sunset. But what if I was wrong? What if they were watching me right now, waiting for me to lower my guard? I checked my leg wound, peeling back the cloth I'd tied around it. 3 parallel gashes about 4 inches long ran across my calf. They weren't deep enough to hit muscle, but they stung fiercely when I cleaned them with my remaining drinking water. I applied antiseptic from my first aid kit and wrapped the leg with a proper bandage. Time crawled by. I paced the beach, scanning the horizon for any sign of Santos's boat. Every few minutes I'd turn to check the forest edge, certain I'd see those red eyes staring back at me. The beautiful island that had felt like paradise for 2 weeks now seemed malevolent, hiding secrets in its dense interior. At one point, I found myself staring at the forest, trying to make sense of what had happened. Those creatures, they weren't natural. The way their eyes had pulled at me, trying to draw something out of me. I shuddered at the memory, and that clicking sound they made. It wasn't like any animal communication I'd ever heard. By midday, exhaustion hit me like a physical weight. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and the previous night's terror had drained me completely. I forced myself to stay on my feet, pacing the beach, splashing seawater on my face whenever my eyelids grew heavy. Stay awake, I told myself. Just a few more hours. When I finally spotted a speck on the horizon, I thought I might be hallucinating, but the speck grew larger, resolving into the familiar shape of Santos's boat. I waved my arms frantically, though I knew he was already heading straight for me. As the boat drew closer, a rush of emotions hit me, relief so intense it made my knees weak, followed immediately by a creeping sense of shame. How was I going to explain what had happened? Would he think I'd lost my mind out here alone? Santos cut the engine as the boat glided toward the shallows. He jumped out, wading through knee-deep water toward me. His weathered face showed genuine concern. "Rush, what happened to you?" he called, taking in my disheveled appearance, the bandage on my leg, my wild eyes. "We need to leave," I said, my voice cracking. "Right now." You said you were attacked? He looked past me toward the forest. Wild boar? Monkey? I shook my head, suddenly struggling to find words that wouldn't make me sound completely insane. It wasn't normal, Captain. These things came at night. Red eyes. They tore apart my camp, tried to get to me. One of them clawed my leg. I expected disbelief, maybe even laughter. Instead, Santos's expression shifted subtly. His eyes narrowed, and he glanced back toward the forest with new wariness. Red eyes, you say? How many? The question caught me off guard. 2. I mean, 2 creatures, each with 2 eyes. Santos nodded slowly. And they came only at night? Stayed away from your fire? My mouth went dry. You know what they are? He didn't answer directly, just put a hand on my shoulder and guided me toward the boat. Let's get you out of here first. We can talk on the way back. As we pushed the boat back into deeper water, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned for one last look at the island. There, at the edge of the forest where shadow and sunlight met, something moved. Not the random motion of wind through leaves, but the deliberate shift of a watching presence. I couldn't see details, just a darker patch of shadow that seemed to track our movements. Something intelligent enough to stay hidden, but bold enough to watch us leave. Santos started the engine, and the boat began to pull away from shore. I kept my eyes fixed on that spot until the distance grew too great to see anything clearly. The island that had represented my lifelong dream, 15 years of saving and planning, grew smaller behind us. What had once symbolized freedom and adventure now filled me with a primal dread that settled deep in my bones. I turned away finally, facing forward as we cut through the waves. The further we got from shore, the more my body began to process what had happened. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. My paradise was gone, replaced by something I couldn't understand, something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. I stared at Captain Santos across the small wooden table in his boat cabin. The gentle rocking beneath us did nothing to calm my mind as he explained what had attacked me on the island. They call it the Sigbin, he said, his weathered face serious in the dim light. My grandfather told stories about them when I was a boy. I thought they were just tales to keep children from wandering at night. A Sigbin, I repeated, testing the unfamiliar word. My leg throbbed where the creature's claws had torn through my flesh. It's a creature that drains blood from its victims, Santos continued, pouring me another cup of strong coffee. The old stories say they have backwards feet, those red eyes you described, and they can make themselves nearly invisible in darkness. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to stop their trembling. The eyes, they did something to me, made me feel like I was being pulled out of my body. Santos nodded gravely. Hypnotic powers. They paralyze their prey before feeding. You're lucky you broke the connection. Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. The memory of those glowing red eyes still burned in my mind, along with the unnatural clicking sounds and the sensation of being studied by something intelligent yet utterly inhuman. I thought I'd researched everything about these islands, I said, more to myself than to Santos. 15 years planning this trip. Not once did I come across anything about blood-draining monsters. Most tourists don't, Santos replied. Tour companies don't exactly put it in their brochures, and many locals won't speak of such things to outsiders. He paused, studying my face. You survived a night with them hunting you. That's unusual. The boat's engine hummed steadily as we continued our journey back to the mainland. I hadn't slept since the attack, afraid to close my eyes even in the safety of Santos's boat. Every shadow seemed to hide those glowing red eyes. We'll reach the fishing village in about an hour, Santos said, standing up. There's someone there you should meet. The fishing village consisted of a cluster of weathered buildings along a curved bay, boats bobbing gently at a simple wooden dock. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped off the boat, partly from the injury and partly from the strange sense of unreality that had settled over me since the attack. Santos led me to a small open-air restaurant overlooking the water. Several locals turned to look at us as we entered, their conversations quieting. An elderly man sat alone at a corner table, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That's Glenn Willis," Santos said quietly. "Been fishing these waters for 60 years. If anyone knows about the Sigbin, it's him." Glenn Willis looked up as we approached, his dark eyes sharp despite his advanced age. He gestured for us to sit. "This is Frankie Rush," Santos explained. "He encountered Sigbin on the North Island, survived a full night of their hunting." Glenn's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you now?" His voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. "Most who meet the Sigbin don't live to tell about it." I described what had happened, the eyes, the clicking sounds, the way they systematically destroyed my camp, how they feared fire and worked together to attack me. Glenn nodded throughout my account, occasionally exchanging glances with Santos. When I finished, he pulled a small wooden pendant from beneath his shirt, showing me a carved symbol. "Protection," he explained. "My grandmother made this for me when I was a boy. I've seen them 3 times in my life. Once when I was 12, fishing with my father. Again when I was 30, when my boat engine died near the Eastern Islands. And 5 years ago, when I foolishly stayed too late gathering shellfish on the reef." "You've survived them 3 times?" I asked, incredulous. Glenn smiled slightly. "I knew what they were. I knew to keep fire close and never look directly at their eyes for too long." He studied me with renewed interest. "But you had no warning, no knowledge, and still you lived. That shows remarkable instinct." Other locals had gathered around our table as I spoke, some nodding in recognition, others making small gestures I assumed were meant to ward off evil. One middle-aged woman placed a cup of hot tea in front of me. "For strength," she said simply before returning to her work. A younger man leaned forward. "My cousin's boat drifted too close to that island 5 years ago. Engine trouble. They found his boat the next day but never found him." More stories followed. Fishermen who disappeared, strange noises heard near certain islands after dark, red eyes spotted from boats that passed too close to shore at twilight. Each account validated my experience while simultaneously making it more terrifying. This wasn't an isolated incident or a hallucination born of isolation. These creatures were known, feared, and very real to the people who lived here. "But what are they?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. "Scientifically, I mean. Some kind of undiscovered species?" Glenn exchanged glances with the others, a look that seemed both amused and pitying. "Not everything fits into your Western categories," he said gently. "Some things exist in the spaces between what you call real and what you dismiss as superstition. The Sigbin has been known to our people for centuries. Whether you call it a cryptid, a demon, or a previously undocumented species doesn't change what it is or what it does." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. My entire life had been built around categorizing, documenting, understanding. I was an accountant, for God's sake. Everything had its proper place, its logical explanation, but the memory of those eyes and the inexplicable pulling sensation they created defied any rational framework I possessed. "Your mind will try to make sense of what happened," Glenn continued, as if reading my thoughts. "It will search for explanations that fit your understanding of the world. That's natural. But some experiences require us to expand our understanding, not force the experience to fit within it." That night, I stayed in a small guest house in the village. Despite the comfortable bed and the exhaustion that weighed on me, sleep remained elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red orbs staring back at me. Every creak of the building sent my heart racing. I kept the lights on all night, watching the door and windows. By morning, dark circles had formed under my eyes, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The wound on my leg had been properly treated by a local nurse, but phantom pains shot through it whenever I thought about the attack. I jumped at sudden noises and kept scanning my surroundings for threats. Santos found me sitting on the guest house porch at dawn, clutching a cup of cold coffee. "You didn't sleep," he observed. I shook my head. "I can't. Every time I try, I'm back there, with those things circling my camp." "That will take time to heal," he said. "The body recovers faster than the mind." We spent the day making arrangements for my return to Seattle. My original plan had been to stay in the Philippines for another week after my island adventure, but now all I wanted was to go home. Yet even as I made these preparations, a part of me wondered if home would ever feel the same again. That evening, Glenn invited me to join him for dinner at his small house near the shore. As we ate a simple meal of fish stew, he shared more stories about the Sigbin and other creatures from Philippine folklore. Some accounts stretched back generations, passed down through families like precious heirlooms. My grandfather claimed the Sigbin were once guardians of sacred places, Glenn said, before they became corrupted and turned to blood drinking. Others say they've always been predators, keeping to the uninhabited islands where they can hunt without drawing too much attention. "Why doesn't anyone warn people?" I asked. "There should be signs, information for tourists." Glenn smiled sadly. "Would you have believed such warnings before your experience? Or would you have dismissed them as local superstition?" I had no answer for that. The truth was, I probably would have seen such warnings as quaint folklore, nothing more. As the days passed and my departure date approached, I found myself caught between two competing urges. Part of me desperately searched for scientific explanations. Rare animals, hallucinogenic plants I might have accidentally ingested, stress-induced paranoia. I spent hours online at the village's small internet cafe, researching known predators of the region. The other part of me had begun to accept that some experiences simply defied categorization. The Sigbin existed in a realm beyond my previous understanding, and that was both terrifying and strangely liberating. My final night in the Philippines, I sat with Santos and Glenn on the beach, watching fishing boats return with their evening catch. The setting sun painted the water in shades of orange and gold, a beauty that now seemed tinged with hidden danger. "What do I do with this?" I asked them. "When I go home, how do I process what happened?" Glenn considered the question carefully. "You carry it with you," he said finally. "Not as a burden, but as knowledge few others possess. The world is wider and stranger than most people ever realize. You've glimpsed beyond the veil that separates the known from the unknown." "That doesn't sound particularly comforting," I said with a weak laugh. "It's not meant to be," Glenn replied. "Truth rarely is." The next morning, Santos drove me to the airport in his battered pickup truck. As we approached the terminal, he turned to me with an earnest expression. "The Sigbin marked you," he said. "Not just physically." He tapped his temple. "They got in here too. That connection. Some say it never fully breaks." A chill ran through me despite the tropical heat. "What does that mean?" "Just be careful," he said. "Keep lights on after dark, and if you ever feel that pulling sensation again, look away immediately." At the security checkpoint, I found myself staring at the customs declaration form, almost laughing at its inadequacy. What was I bringing back from the Philippines? A fundamental shift in how I understood reality. The knowledge that some things existed beyond the boundaries of scientific classification. A newfound fear of darkness and what it might conceal. None of these fit neatly into the categories on the form. As I boarded my flight home, I caught my reflection in a window, thinner, paler, with a haunted look in my eyes that hadn't been there when I arrived. The 3 parallel scars on my leg would eventually fade to thin white lines, but other marks remained invisible, yet equally permanent. I settled into my seat, keeping the reading light on even as other passengers dimmed theirs for the long trans-Pacific flight. Seattle awaited me, my apartment, my job, my former life. But as the plane lifted off Philippine soil, I knew with absolute certainty that I was not the same person who had left Seattle 3 weeks ago. That Frankie Rush had died somewhere on that island, replaced by someone forever changed by an encounter with something that shouldn't exist, but undeniably did. I stared at the spreadsheet on my screen, the numbers blurring together as my mind drifted back to the island. 3 months had passed since my return to Seattle, but the office walls seemed to close in on me more each day. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I'd requested to sit directly beneath them, yet they offered none of the security I craved. "Frankie, the Wilkins account needs to be finalized by end of day." My supervisor's voice startled me from across the room. "Yeah, I'm on it," I said, forcing my attention back to the screen. The quarterly tax projections that once gave me satisfaction now felt meaningless. How could anyone care about depreciation schedules when there were creatures with glowing red eyes hiding in the darkness? The thought made my heart race, and I took several deep breaths to calm myself. At 5 o'clock, I packed up quickly and headed home, keeping my head down in the elevator to avoid small talk. The Seattle rain beat against my hood as I hurried to my car, checking the back seat before getting in, a new habit I couldn't shake. My apartment building looked the same as it had for the 5 years I'd lived there, but it no longer felt like home. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, keys gripped between my knuckles. Inside, I flipped on every light switch before doing my usual check of closets and under the bed. The place looked different now. I'd installed motion sensor lights in every room, plus 3 extra lamps in the bedroom alone. Blackout curtains covered all windows, sealed with duct tape at the edges. A security camera monitored my front door, sending alerts to my phone for any movement. My neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I heated up a microwave dinner and ate standing at my kitchen counter, facing the door. The apartment felt both suffocating and dangerously exposed. Every creak made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to move. When bedtime came, I went through my ritual, checking the locks 3 times, turning on the white noise machine to drown out any clicking sounds, and positioning my bedside lamp to eliminate all shadows. I lay down fully clothed, a baseball bat within arm's reach. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, the nightmares followed. Red eyes floating in darkness, that pulling sensation, like my consciousness was being drawn from my body, the clicking sounds growing louder. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the bedside lamp still burning. It was only 2 in the morning. I wouldn't sleep again tonight. I got up and made coffee, then opened my laptop. The folder labeled Research now contained hundreds of files, newspaper articles, forum posts, academic papers, and my own notes. I'd been collecting them obsessively since my return. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Poker night tomorrow? We miss you, man." I stared at the message. Mike had been my friend for 8 years. We used to hike together on weekends. Now the thought of entering the woods made my stomach turn. I'd canceled on him 4 times in the last month. "Can't make it. Deadline at work," I typed back. Another lie. The truth was, I couldn't bear to see the concern in my friend's eyes. Couldn't stand their well-meaning questions about my trip. How could I explain that I jumped at shadows now? That I checked under my bed each night like a frightened child? That I knew things existed in this world that shouldn't be possible? By morning, I'd added 3 new articles to my research folder. One described a similar creature in Malaysian folklore. Another detailed unexplained disappearances in remote areas of the Philippines dating back decades. The third was a scientific paper questioning the hypnotic abilities of certain predators. I called in sick to work, again. My boss was losing patience, but I couldn't face another day of pretending to care about tax codes and client meetings. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop across town, one with bright lighting and tables facing the wall. I spread out my notes and continued my research. The patterns were becoming clearer. Similar encounters spanned cultures and continents. Red eyes, hypnotic effects, nocturnal attacks, clicking sounds. My experience wasn't unique. "Mind if I join you?" A woman stood beside my table, coffee in hand. All the other seats are taken. I hesitated, then nodded, quickly gathering my papers into a pile. "Sorry to interrupt your work," she said, sitting down. "I'm Elise." "Frankie," I replied, avoiding eye contact. "Are you a writer?" she asked, gesturing to my notes. "No, just personal research." She nodded, seeming to sense my discomfort, and opened her own laptop. We sat in silence for nearly an hour before she spoke again. "I hope this isn't weird, but are you researching trauma responses?" I looked up, startled. "What makes you say that?" She pointed to one of my papers, the title partially visible. "Post-Traumatic Stress and Hypervigilance, a Clinical Approach." "I lead a support group," she explained, "for trauma survivors." I recognized the literature. Something in her calm, matter-of-fact tone made me pause. "What kind of support group?" "All kinds of trauma. Military veterans, accident survivors, victims of violence, people who've seen things others haven't." She slid a card across the table. "Tuesdays at 7, if you're interested. No pressure to share until you're ready." I took the card, skeptical but desperate for connection with anyone who might understand even a fraction of what I was going through. The following Tuesday, I found myself sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a community center basement. The fluorescent lighting was reassuringly bright. Elise nodded to me as I took a seat, but didn't single me out. "We all have different stories," she began. "But what unites us is that moment when the world as we knew it changed forever, when we realized how fragile safety really is." I listened as others shared pieces of their experiences. A car accident, a home invasion, a tour in Afghanistan. No one shared everything. No one had to explain or justify their fears. When my turn came, I simply said, "I was alone on an island when something happened that I still can't fully process." No one pushed for details. No one dismissed it with platitudes. They just nodded, recognizing the shell-shocked look we all shared. I returned the next week, and the next. I never mentioned red eyes or creatures that shouldn't exist, but I talked about fear, about feeling like I was living in a different reality than everyone around me, and they understood. 6 months after my return, an old college friend who ran an adventure club asked me to speak about solo travel safety. I agreed, carefully crafting a presentation that warned about the dangers of isolation without revealing the true nature of my encounter. "The wilderness doesn't care about your preparation," I told the room of eager backpackers. "There are things out there we don't understand, places humans aren't meant to go alone." "Like what?" someone called out. I paused, considering how much to share. "Like creatures adapted to hunt in ways we can't comprehend. Predators that have evolved alongside human fears." They thought I was being metaphorical. They laughed at the right moments, took notes about practical safety measures. But a few, the ones with their own stories, perhaps, met my eyes with recognition. After the talk, a gray-haired man approached me. "You've seen something, haven't you?" he asked quietly. "Something you can't explain." I studied his face, looking for mockery and finding none. "Maybe." He nodded. "Me too. Costa Rica, 1987. No one believed me either." We didn't exchange details. We didn't need to. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone, that others had glimpsed behind the curtain of reality and lived to keep the secret. As months turned into a year, I found a new rhythm to my life. I still slept with the lights on. I still researched obsessively, but the support group gave me tools to manage the anxiety, to distinguish between hypervigilance and necessary caution. My research transformed from desperate validation seeking to something more purposeful. I created an anonymous blog documenting similar phenomena worldwide, connecting with others who had experienced the unexplainable. The work became both obsession and therapy, giving meaning to my trauma. I started hiking again, never alone, never at night, and never on islands. But the fresh air and movement helped clear my mind. I kept my job, though I no longer defined myself by it. Some friends drifted away, unable to understand my transformed personality, but others stayed, accepting the changed version of me without needing explanations. One evening, sitting on my balcony watching the sunset, something I'd recently become able to do without panicking as darkness fell, I realized I was making peace with my experience, not forgetting, not dismissing, but integrating it into a new understanding of reality. Some mysteries would remain unexplained. Some boundaries between worlds were thinner than we like to believe. But I could live with that knowledge now, could use it to help others navigate their own brushes with the unknown. The red eyes still appeared in my dreams sometimes, but now, occasionally, I could face them without waking in terror. I could remind myself that I had survived, that I had built a life in the aftermath, and in those moments, I felt something close to healing. I stared at the package sitting on my kitchen counter, postmarked from the Philippines. It had been exactly 1 year since I'd stepped off the plane in Seattle, swearing never to return to that part of the world. The brown paper wrapping bore Captain Santos's careful handwriting, a name I'd tried hard to forget. For several minutes, I just stood there, coffee growing cold in my hand. My apartment was bright with midday sun streaming through windows I no longer covered with blackout curtains. Progress, my therapist called it. But the sight of that package made my stomach tighten. I set down my mug and picked up the package. It was lightweight, barely anything inside. With trembling fingers, another reaction I couldn't quite shake, I tore open the paper. Inside was a manila envelope and a handwritten note. "Frankie, you should see this. Not the only one. Santos." My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the envelope. Several newspaper clippings slid out onto the counter, along with what looked like a torn journal page. I spread them out, my breathing shallow. The headline on the first clipping read, "American tourist missing after solo trip to Samal Island." The article detailed how a 28-year-old backpacker named Marcus Chen had vanished 3 weeks ago after hiring a local boat to take him to a remote beach. Search parties found his campsite in disarray, with strange tracks in the sand and his tent shredded. "No," I whispered, pushing the clipping away. The second article was a follow-up, reporting that the search had been called off. Authorities suspected an animal attack or that Chen had drowned while swimming. His family was quoted saying he was an experienced outdoorsman who would never take unnecessary risks, just like me. The third item made my legs give out. I sank onto a kitchen stool, holding the torn journal page with both hands to keep it steady. It contained several sketches, crude but unmistakable drawings of eyes. Red eyes, exactly like the ones that haunted my dreams. Beneath the drawings were scribbled notes. "They come at night. Stay by fire. Red eyes. Can't look directly at them. Clicking sound. More than one." I dropped the page like it had burned me. Chen had seen them too. The Sigbin. And now he was gone. I pushed away from the counter and paced my apartment, running my hands through my hair. My therapist had worked hard to convince me that what I'd experienced was a trauma response, that my mind had created the monsters to process the fear of being alone in the wilderness, that the Sigbin was just folklore I'd internalized. But here was proof. Someone else had seen them. Someone else who might not have survived. I grabbed my phone, then set it down, picked it up again. What would I even say to Santos? Thanks for ruining my recovery? Or worse, what do you expect me to do about it? Because that was the question, wasn't it? Santos hadn't sent this as a courtesy update. He wanted me to do something. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, unable to focus on work or anything else. By evening, I sat on my balcony watching the Seattle skyline light up as darkness fell. The city lights were comforting, proof that I wasn't alone, that civilization surrounded me. I'd chosen this apartment specifically for this view after returning from the Philippines. The question kept circling in my mind. What was my responsibility here? I could call the authorities in the Philippines, but what would I tell them? That mythical creatures with hypnotic powers were hunting tourists? They'd dismiss me as crazy. I could contact Chen's family, but that seemed cruel, giving them false hope or burdening them with an explanation they couldn't possibly accept. Or I could go back. The thought made me physically ill. I rushed to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. Going back to the Philippines, to those islands, meant facing everything I'd run from. The nightmares, the paranoia, the red eyes that still appeared in my dreams. But if I didn't, and someone else disappeared, I spent a sleepless night weighing my options. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called my boss and requested 2 weeks of personal leave. To his credit, he didn't question it, probably relieved I was finally using my vacation days instead of working obsessively. Next, I booked a flight to the Philippines for the following day. Each click on the airline website felt like sealing my fate. The confirmation email arrived with a cheerful, "We look forward to your journey." That made me laugh bitterly. I packed methodically, including items I hadn't touched in a year. My hunting knife, a high-powered flashlight with extra batteries, and water purification tablets. Not that I planned to go anywhere near those islands, but the familiar weight of these tools in my bag offered some comfort. That night, I called Elise from my support group. "I'm going back," I said when she answered. "Back where?" she asked, then paused. "Oh, are you sure that's wise, Frankie?" "No," I admitted. "But someone else encountered what I did. They might not have survived. I have to try to help." "This isn't your responsibility," she said gently. "Your recovery is ongoing," I finished. "But staying here, knowing I could have helped prevent another tragedy, that wouldn't help my recovery either." She was quiet for a moment. "What can I do?" "Just be available if I need to talk. And if I don't come back in 2 weeks, there's a folder on my laptop labeled Research. Make sure it gets to the right people." "That's not funny, Frankie. It wasn't meant to be." The journey to the airport the next morning was an exercise in willpower. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to retreat to the safety of my apartment with its motion sensor lights and security cameras. Instead, I checked in for my flight, passed through security, and found my gate. Sitting in the crowded terminal, I felt oddly calm. The decision had been made. Now, I just had to follow through. The calm evaporated as soon as the plane took off. 14 hours trapped in a metal tube, hurtling toward the very place that had broken something fundamental inside me. I kept the reading light on the entire flight, earning annoyed glances from passengers trying to sleep. I didn't care. Darkness was still my enemy. I landed in Manila with shaking legs and clammy palms. The humid air hit me as I exited the airport, bringing back memories I'd tried hard to suppress. I checked into a hotel near the harbor, then sent a text to the number Santos had included with his package. "I'm here. Where can we meet?" His response came quickly. "Fisherman's Wharf Cafe, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I spent the night in my hotel room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound from the hallway. Sleep came in brief, fitful bursts, interrupted by the same nightmare. Red eyes in the darkness, a pulling sensation, the sound of clicking. The cafe sat on a weathered wooden pier extending into the harbor. Fishing boats bobbed in the water, and the smell of salt and diesel filled the air. I arrived early, choosing a table with my back to the wall and a clear view of all entrances. Santos looked older than I remembered, his salt and pepper hair now more salt than pepper. He spotted me immediately and navigated between the tables with the easy gait of a man comfortable on uneven surfaces. "Frankie," he said, extending his hand. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I shook his hand briefly. Neither was I. He sat across from me, ordering coffee when the waitress approached. I already had a cup cooling in front of me, my third of the morning. "You look better," he said, studying my face. "More rested." "I'm not," I replied flatly. "Why did you send me those articles?" Santos sighed, rubbing his weathered face. "Because it's happening again. Not just Chen. There have been others, mostly tourists who go island hopping alone. They disappear, and the authorities blame it on drowning or animal attacks." "And you think it's the Sigbin?" I know it is. He leaned forward. Chen's journal, the page I sent you, was found in what was left of his backpack. The local police think he was hallucinating from dehydration or eating the wrong plants. But you and I know better. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, needing something to ground me. What do you expect me to do? I barely survived my encounter. But you did survive, Santos pointed out. That makes you one of the few who has seen them and lived to tell about it. The authorities won't listen to local folklore, but they might listen to an American accountant with no reason to make up stories. I'm not going back to any island, I said firmly. Not for any reason. I'm not asking you to. Santos held up his hands. Just talk to the Coast Guard, the tourism board. Help them understand what they're dealing with so they can warn people properly. I laughed bitterly. And tell them what? Stay away from the mythical creatures with the hypnotic eyes? They'll have me committed. Then help me, Santos pressed. I've been tracking the disappearances, trying to find patterns, but I'm just a boat captain. You're the one with the fancy degree in analyzing numbers. That caught me off guard. You want me to… what? Create a statistical model for Sigbin attacks? If that's what it takes to save lives. Santos's expression was deadly serious. Look, I know coming back here was hard for you. I can see it in your face, but you're here now. Will you help? I stared out at the harbor, watching boats come and go. Part of me wanted to walk away, to get on the next plane back to Seattle and pretend this conversation never happened. But Chen's journal page kept flashing in my mind, those crude drawings of red eyes that matched my nightmares exactly. I'll help, I said finally. But I'm not setting foot on any island, not even the main ones. I stay on the mainland, period. Relief washed over Santos's face. Thank you. I have a friend in the Coast Guard, Lieutenant Cruz. He's more open-minded than most. We can meet with him this afternoon. Lieutenant Cruz's office overlooked the harbor, with maps of the Philippine archipelago covering one wall. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that softened when Santos introduced me. Mr. Rush, he said, shaking my hand. Captain Santos speaks highly of your experience, though I must admit I'm skeptical about some aspects of his theory. I was skeptical too, I replied, until I spent a night fighting for my life against something I couldn't explain. For the next hour, I recounted my experience in clinical detail, the red eyes, the hypnotic effect, the clicking sounds, the coordinated hunting tactics. I described how they feared fire and tested defenses, how they became more desperate as dawn approached. Cruz listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. If anyone else told me this story, I would dismiss it, he said. But your account matches details from other incidents that were never made public. He pulled out a file and spread several photos across his desk. They showed torn tents, strange tracks in mud and sand, and claw marks on trees, all eerily similar to what I'd encountered. These are from 5 different islands over the past 3 years, Cruz explained. We've lost 7 tourists and 3 locals. The official reports cite animal attacks or accidents, but you know that's not what happened. I finished. Cruz nodded grimly. The problem is, I can't exactly put out a warning about mythical creatures. My superiors would have me transferred to desk duty in Manila so fast my head would spin. Then don't call them mythical, I suggested. Call them unidentified predators. Focus on the behavior, nocturnal, hunt in pairs, afraid of fire, rather than what they might be. That could work, Cruz admitted. But we still need to identify high-risk areas. These attacks seem random. Maybe not, I said, studying the map on his wall. Santos mentioned you've been tracking the disappearances. Do you have the data? Cruz produced a spreadsheet with dates, locations, and basic details of each incident. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spent the rest of the day hunched over Cruz's computer, entering the data and looking for patterns that might not be obvious at first glance. By evening, a picture was emerging. The attacks weren't evenly distributed throughout the archipelago. They clustered around certain island groups with seasonal variations that suggested migration patterns. They're territorial, I explained to Santos and Cruz as we reviewed my preliminary findings. They seem to rotate between 3 main hunting grounds based on the time of year, and they prefer smaller islands with freshwater sources, places tourists might visit for day trips or camping. Cruz looked impressed. This is more than we've been able to determine in 3 years. I'm good with patterns, I said with a shrug. It's what I do. Over the next week, I refined my analysis, incorporating additional data Cruz provided about island topography, tourist traffic, and local reports of unusual sounds or missing livestock. The picture became clearer. The Sigbin had predictable hunting patterns that could be mapped and anticipated. Cruz used my findings to implement new safety protocols, requiring tour operators to provide emergency radios, establishing no camping zones on high-risk islands during certain months, and distributing fire safety kits to anyone venturing to remote areas. He couldn't officially warn people about the Sigbin, but he could create systems that would protect them from the specific threats these creatures posed. As my scheduled return to Seattle approached, I felt a strange reluctance to leave. Not because I had grown comfortable in the Philippines, I still slept with the lights on and jumped at unexpected sounds, but because the work felt unfinished. You've done more than enough, Santos assured me as we sat at the same harbor cafe where we'd first met upon my return. Cruz has already implemented your recommendations. Tourist safety briefings now include warnings about traveling alone and the importance of maintaining fire at night. It doesn't feel like enough, I admitted. These things are still out there. People are still in danger. People are always in danger, Santos said wisely. From storms, from currents, from their own bad decisions. All we can do is try to minimize the risks we know about. I watched a tour boat loading passengers for an island-hopping excursion. The guide was distributing bright orange emergency radios, one of Cruz's new requirements. It was something, at least. Will you be okay going back to Seattle? Santos asked. After facing all this again? I considered the question. I think so. Oddly enough, coming back here has helped. Facing it directly instead of just reliving it in nightmares. You turned your trauma into something useful, Santos observed. Not many people can do that. On my final evening in the Philippines, I stood alone at the harbor railing, watching boats return as sunset painted the water orange and gold. I thought about Marcus Chen and the others who hadn't survived their encounters, about how close I had come to being another unexplained disappearance. The red eyes would probably always appear in my dreams. The sound of clicking in the darkness would likely always make my heart race. But these reactions no longer defined me. They were just part of my story now, a story that had helped save others from the same fate. As darkness fell over the harbor, I didn't retreat inside as I would have a week ago. Instead, I stayed, watching the lights of boats bobbing on the water and the stars appearing overhead. The darkness still held dangers, but it no longer held power over me.